So we're just going to get started. We've been really enjoying this time before the concert, and in the virtual world, the time before the concert really is intrinsic to the whole enjoyment of the evening. We call it pre-concert grace notes, and that's because it's the thing that comes before. But also we mean it to be a gracious time that is a blessing to everyone who engages in conversation, and for those who are out in the world listening, friends of Wheaton College, friends of Lara and Matt's, and all sorts of other people. Last concert we'd had with Harlem Quartet and John Patitucci, we were just really so appreciated the fact that there were people listening from all over the country, and it used to be that this room was just it. It was filled, and we enjoyed those times together, and we're looking forward to returning to those days, hopefully sooner than later. Good evening, and my name is Tony Payne. I'm the general manager of the Wheaton College Artist Series, and I'm very, very happy to have you join us for this brief 30-minute conversation. This conversation would best be enjoyed in one of our living rooms or in a parlor around the piano, where we could sit and enjoy each other's company. Perhaps there's a fire with logs burning. But we're going to settle for this because it's the way that we can make it easiest for you to link to this program and then to return on the same channel, the same access code, and join us for the music that begins at 7:30 with an introduction by Dean Michael Wilder. I have been working on projects like this for a long time, since I came to Wheaton in 1983, and I find that more than anything else, it's the people. It's the joy of being with people, of learning the stories and sharing the music. And if I started to share some of those stories, that would take all of our 30 minutes. Instead, I'm going to introduce our guests, and then we're just going to enter into some conversation, perhaps about the program, music, the future, hope, grace, things that are of interest to us. So please, first of all, my colleagues from Wheaton College Conservatory of Music at the far end, cellist Leonardo Altino. Hi, Leo.
Hello.
And next to him, Dr. Daniel Paul Horn, who you heard last fall in the premiere of the Richard Danielpour Seven Mysteries. And Dan has been the chair of the piano department here for...
I've been chair since 2002, and I've been here since 1984.
And we're really glad both of you are here. But today's a special day because we have guests from off campus. It's actually quite extraordinary that we have these guests because between their manager and Lara's husband, Steve Judson, who is a dear and old friend of mine, and the staff in his office and multiple departments on our campus, we sometimes wonder, can we make this happen? And we hold it loosely, but we pray. And here we are tonight. This is the answer to the prayer that Lara St. the distinguished violinist, and Matt Herskowitz, the distinguished pianist, both in jazz and classical music, are here on this stage, and at 7:30, you're going to hear their genius. We've enjoyed their residency in the last few days as they've spoken with students. They've conducted master classes, and I see that Matt really practices hard because every time I hear either about him or tonight when I met him, he was practicing. I hope that bodes well for the concert, Matt.
Me too.
So Matt and Lara, first of all, just give us a little thumbnail sketch of where you come from, where you were born, what you want us to know about yourselves. Lara?
Well, we call ourselves North American because I'm Canadian born and I live in New York, and Matt is born in New York and lives in Canada. So it's almost like we kind of crossed borders at basically the same time, which is funny. I was born in Ontario. I'm half from Quebec, and I have moved around quite a lot in my life, and now I've been living in New York City for quite some time.
So you call New York City home, not just because Stephen Judson is there.
I call it home, but Canada is always going to be real home.
In a minute, I want you to tell me about some of the things you've been innovating during this pandemic. But Matt, you have such an unusual pedigree. You've had education in unique and impressive places, but your virtuosity, to anyone who studies your website or looks for your recordings, you really have attained mastery in multiple musical languages, and this is something that I admire a great deal. As an improviser myself and a composer, I find that improvising into a particular dialect is just not for the faint of heart. So tell us about that.
Well, I would say it's more for an adventurous spirit. Improvisation is all about going out on the ledge without the net, and just communicating directly and on the spot. So you're not channeling any composer, you're channeling yourself. And the challenge with that is, in the art of interpretation, the challenge is to find your own voice in interpreting someone else's work. And in an improvisation, it's to just find your own voice, period. And when you do what you do, your playing will not sound like anyone else is playing, and then you know you're ready to do it in front of the audience.
Do you subscribe to the theory that that improvisation calls forth a whole different set of latent skills or a different part of your brain?
I don't know. I don't know about that. I suspect that more classical musicians could improvise if that were something that were offered in the places where they studied. I studied there too, so I should say in the places where we studied. I studied improvisation like on the streets. I didn't get it in school. But there's no, like I remember in Montreal I taught for a few years, I taught a course of improvisation for classical musicians. And down to the last one who were convinced that they couldn't do it, they all did it. And so the proof is sort of in the pudding. It's not that you have to be great, but it helps. It helps to just see music, through another lens, and to acquire some new skills and maybe some new musical language, and perhaps expand technique a little bit, because when you're improvising, you don't get the luxury of doing some convenient classical fingering. Sometimes you got to do an awkward one.
Yeah, that's all really wonderful insight, and you might be amused at the fact that I actually learned how to improvise in Sunday evening services of Baptist churches as a youth. And so there was this lady who I think of to this very day. She had a beehive hairdo that was quite tall, and she played the old gospel hymns with arpeggios and octaves. I think Dan will know what I'm talking about.
We must have had the same lady at both of our churches. I swear.
That's right, and I watched that and I listened. And I think in the very elemental spaces of improvisation are the idea of filling in spaces, so that if you're playing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, and you fill in the spaces in between on the way to the destination notes, that's the beginning of a journey. And I've spent my life trying to encourage so-called classically trained, score-trained musicians to think about that. So what I want to do, the other afternoon I heard about the way that you, because of your experience, can come at Beethoven, which is going to be performed first on the program. And Lara, if you don't mind commenting on this idea of looking at music with a new perspective, and having some liberties that come out of the kind of experience that Matt's describing?
Well, basically in the Kreutzer Sonata, we do variations on the variations. And that's because, in a way, improvisation is in classical, or I guess as you put it, score trained, which is probably a better way of putting it. It's a lost art. At Beethoven's time, he and George Bridgetower, who he wrote this for, would definitely not have played the repeat of a variation twice exactly the same way. They would have definitely improvised all over the place, and it would have been really fun and exciting. And so we've kind of brought that back a little bit into the repeat sections of the Kreutzer Sonata.
So tonight, probably only Dan and Leo will know those secrets, but the rest of us will watch
It's
and
been
wonder.
so long since I've played it. You know, you mentioned George Bridgetower, and you know, we should actually be calling it the Bridgetower Sonata.
Absolutely.
Although he and Beethoven had a fight after the premiere, and Beethoven never spoke to him again. But probably most people in our audience would not be aware that Bridgetower was a British violinist of partially African descent. And I find that fascinating, and I'm wondering if that fact has anything to do with the way you look at the sonata.
Well, it's I mean, okay, it's just so well known as the Kreutzer Sonata
Right.
that I mean, yeah, it should be called the Bridge Tower, obviously, but it has something to do with Cherchez la femme, I believe. I think he insulted one of Beethoven's lady friends or something
Right.
like that. Anyway, so Beethoven rescinded his dedication and then gave it to Rodolphe Kreutzer, who actually hated the piece and never played it.
Right.
But unfortunately, that name stuck, and then stuck into the next century when Tolstoy wrote a novella about it, and then Janacek wrote a quartet about the novella. So there was just so much Kreutzer Sonata going on that the name, I'm afraid, is probably stuck there for all eternity at this point. But yeah, his ninth sonata is way different from the 8th and the 10th. It's first of all, it's far larger, it's basically the apex of the classical era, really, when it comes to violin and piano sonatas, and it's way crazier. Actually, it's much less, like all of his other sonatas are much more, I guess, normal. But one thing's for sure, it's he puts in so many. At the risk of sounding a little trite, honestly, they are such catchy tunes. and he just has so much fun with it, and you can really feel all of his sort of ferocity and yet sense of humor at the same time throughout.
Yeah, and how often does Matt remind you that the title page of the original says Sonata for Piano and Violin?
Yeah, well, you'll hear that.
Well, I want to ask you all to think about this question, and before you answer, I want to go down to my dear friend at the end, Leonardo, and talk to him about the Brazilian influences in his work as a cellist. But your assignment for after Leonardo speaks is this: I want to know about innovation during the pandemic. And so each of you have been innovating your way as teachers, as scholars, as performers, as improvisers, and composers. And I think it would be really interesting for the people that are out there listening to know what a toll the pandemic has taken on the musical lives of professional musicians. I heard that the Met is going to start, that the Met musicians are getting paychecks for the first time, this fall or something? I don't know. But Leo, I don't want to lose this beautiful strand about your Brazilian upbringing, and you certainly must have known folk music and music that was native to your country. Many here in the US think that there's only one composer in South America, and that's Piazzolla, right? Everybody plays Piazzolla these days. But I'm wondering, what about your experiences, and does improvisation play a part in any of that?
It's interesting because perhaps the most famous composer from Brazil is Villa-Lobos. Now, as somebody who grew up in Brazil, and I'd be interested to hear different opinions here, Villa-Lobos spent a lot of time in France. And so for a lot of Brazilians, listening to his music, they think this is not Brazilian music, it's French music. And so there's a little bit of, for some people, some aversion to that. Now, the interesting thing is, some years ago, I was playing with a French pianist, Monique Dufil, and Monique is a tremendous pianist, and she loves the music of Villa-Lobos. And she corrected me, and she said, no, 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 it is Brazilian. And she said Villa-Lobos brought the forest to Paris. In a way, growing up in Brazil, I literally grew up in the forests. Not really like the Amazon, but I lived in the greenest capital of the entire country. So you can imagine, it's very beautiful, full of trees everywhere. The downside is tremendous allergies that I used to have until I moved to a more polluted city like São Paulo. So Brazil, I think one of the things that's very traditional, there's a saying in Brazil that even when there is a funeral, it ends up in samba. The idea is that people enjoy so much being with each other and singing and making music together that it's part of the fabric of the culture, a natural thing for us to sit around food and drinks and enjoy each other and just start singing. And you pick up anything that's around you and you start making music. My home was like that a little bit, thanks to my parents, who are both professional musicians. I would wake up, and my dad was a concertmaster in several of the orchestras in Brazil, and always there was, of course, scales, and then there was something like a Max Bruch concerto, then I would hear excerpts from Beethoven concerto, then there was all kinds of solos from orchestral literature. And so making music was just a natural part of life. I don't know that that's unique to my particular upbringing, but maybe the component of it was for no particular goal other than the mere enjoyment of the music.
That's beautiful. And I would love to come and experience that sometime, because it sounds, the food, the music all together, we've lost some of that sense, and it's even a more profound loss through these last 12, 14 months. We've lost so much, and I know that our congregations singing together is one great loss. Our choirs across America is another great loss. The fact that singers and wind players are the most perilous in terms of navigating the COVID virus. And so those are things we have to look forward to, and I'm hoping that actually in America that there will be a renewal of community music experiences. And that's why it's amazing how this experience can become so intimate, because people know the backdrop of where we've been, what we've been experiencing through this time. And that's why I think it'll be interesting for you to talk about your innovations. And don't be modest. I think you've all done extraordinary things. And I'd love to hear about it, and I think others would too. Dan, are you poised?
Well, I'm poised. One thing that I'm thinking of, jumping off from what you just said, is that I've had a sneaking suspicion for a number of years now, this is not a new thought of mine, that it's quite possible, even probable, that the future of classical music will begin to look more and more like the present day circumstance of folk music. Mm-hmm. That it's going to be more of a grassroots thing. You're going to see more things that are happening not in 3,500 seat concert halls, but in living rooms, in churches, in coffee houses, all of these new performance venues in New York that have sprung up since I was there. And I do suspect that it's going to be less of the big classical music industry and more of people doing it at the grassroots because they love it and they can't do anything else. They don't want to do anything else, I should say.
And that's, to me, that's a really exciting vision, Dan. And of course, it's also a terrifying vision, because the economic scale of loss is so profound in the lives of so many people. Laura, do you want to talk about this at all? What would you like to share?
Well,
I know you and Steve have been up to fun things in New York from your apartment building.
Well, yeah, innovation-wise, and a little bit along those lines to help fellow musicians of mine, the second floor of the place where we live, because of COVID, ended up having a vacancy, and it's this mahogany-lined ballrooms type thing from 1902 or whatever, and it's just absolutely gorgeous, and I looked at it and I thought, we have to have a series here. And so we ended up sort of becoming a little bit Robin Hood, like managing to find people who weren't hurting too much from the pandemic to be able to help us to pay the musicians to come and do the concerts. It's at the Atterbury House, and it's a series of 12 concerts, and so far we've done 5. And they're all just online. I mean, sometimes we have a couple of donors there, you know, whatever the law allows. But it's been really, really wonderful. And it's just an incredible group of 12 ensembles and people. We have no piano, so it's all either strings, voice, or winds. And so it's been quite a challenge in a way, but it's actually, I do all the lighting and the videography, and we have a professional audio person, and so it's not like your average kind of, you know, from your living room kind of thing. It's very beautiful, I think.
I've looked in on a couple of the programs, and I thank you, first of all, for what you have been doing to try to, well, Pope John the 23rd said, see everything, turn a blind eye to most of it, and change a little. And so you're using the resources that you have at your disposal to present these concerts. I've been saying throughout the pandemic that there are 2 goals for the performing arts. We could talk about the spirituality issues, this is a Christian college, all that, but I've set 2 goals. One is helping to heal our communities, and the other is to restore joy. Mm-hmm. And I really believe in those goals. And Matt, I'd like you to comment, and then Leo, if you don't mind, you're actually an early adopter with a lot of the technology, so you can talk about commuting from Madison if you want to, but I want to hear about innovation as a teacher with all of these constraints on you. And Dan may, of course, want to comment too, but Matt?
Okay, innovation within
Sure.
the constraints of COVID?
Sure.
Well,
Mike.
okay, sorry. Yeah, well, there's been more video for sure. I recorded a video concert at the request of some presenters, and that's been aired. People pay for the link and then they get it. It's all seemed new to me, like I hadn't heard of any of that happening before, and it seemed like a logical thing to do. And I wanted to make a recording that's like a video that's not perfect. It's a live performance, but you can fix it up a little bit.
Yeah.
And I recently did a concert at a beautiful old theater in Montreal with the Orchestre Symphonique de Longueuil, and it was at this beautiful hall, and it was kind of a crazy thing. It's called Baroque, so it's like rock arrangements of Baroque music. And it was a lot of fun, lots of camera work, and empty hall, but you're playing for whoever is the subscription audience of that place. So performance-wise, there's been a few things, and what happened, like right before the pandemic, I got this big job of arranging music, mostly Gershwin, to Ravel and Stravinsky, for an eventual video recording, and for Medici TV. And the arrangements have been sort of like, the pandemic's sort of been good for that, because you're at home all the time. And
we get more composing done.
Yeah, you could just, exactly, it's sort of like you're not on the road all the time, you're not, so you don't have to prepare for a bunch of other things constantly, and usually I'm away as much as I'm home, and this is the first time I've actually been away, So I've been, and then I did some, people asked me, hey, could you record this piece for me, send me the music, or can you record this and I'll sing on top of it, or things like that. That sort of recording, one track at a time. And I did that a few times early on in the pandemic. People who wanted to do stuff and you couldn't get together did that. So that's sort of been my experience, is that there has been a little bit of everything. And I guess due to some of the varied skills that I have in both jazz and classical, and knowing how to use Logic and use that technology, that's been kind of interesting. I miss performing, and it's wonderful to be here to perform, even for the cameras. We know it's a live stream, so we know they're watching, and it's really nice to actually get out of the house and
I have to tell you that last month when with Harlem Quartet and John Patitucci, they did some gorgeous Patitucci, some Coltrane. It was a beautiful program, but they came in and they rehearsed, and they were emotional about being together for the first time, making music. It was very touching. And it was much more, again, intimate for me, much more satisfying than I expected. I know it's not easy for those of you that are out listening and watching on your computer desktops, and you're trying to get to the right link and you're struggling with all of that. I know it's not easy, but it's worth it. And for right now, this is what we can do. We can't really be sure what the future holds yet. We don't know what's going to be happening in the fall or the spring, but we can hope that there will be times when this beautiful sound of pre-concert fellowship will be heard in this place that's been the host of some extraordinary artists. I'll show you the list sometime, and it's just an amazing list of artists.
There's one thing to add. It's been a really long time, obviously over a year since Lara and I have played, and we usually play together a lot. So one thing that was really nice was to come to New York and then just like rehearse this stuff for the first time. And it was just really nice to play together again.
Wonderful.
It's something we have not been able to do.
Yeah, well, we are thrilled that there's just this little moment that we can enjoy together.
Say, Tony?
Yes.
Speaking of innovation, I think before we get too close to concert time, we should talk a little bit about the second half of this program,
Yes.
which I just love as a concept. The idea of pairing the Bartók Second Sonata with music from Eastern Europe and the Near East.
All right, so that's your assignment, but I want to hear from Leo about his innovations as a teacher and a performer, and anything you want to share, Leo. And then it seems like you're over there in Cook County and I'm in DuPage County, so I just want to make sure I don't lose track of you. And then Lara and Matt, if you don't mind, just especially focus. We've talked a little about the Beethoven, but that second half is pretty wonderful. For those of you that don't know, on your desktop where you access this program, there is a PDF program that you can pull down and read about all of the wonderful people that are involved in tonight's concert. So, Leo?
I'm not sure that what I have learned or the innovations I've accomplished are necessarily very special, but certainly, one of the things I think about is the importance for musicians to record themselves. Wouldn't you say? So, for example, I often I liken for a musician to record themselves to maybe a dancer watching themselves in the mirror. Or if you have an important event, you always want to look in a mirror, right? To make sure your hair is okay and so on and so forth. Musicians, we need that feedback, and recording seems to be part of that process. So I would say that I am much more geared up to record not just in my home and in my studio here at the college, but I'm also able to help my students a lot better in that regard and help them prepare recordings that are very good, actually, I should say. I learned to prepare to make video concerts, which is a new thing for me. I learned, I think Lara probably knows more than I do, but to do the editing of video with sound, work on the sound and then put it all together, that's new to me, but now I know how to do it. There's a festival in Brazil that I'll be participating next week, but the concert has been pre-recorded already, and it will be that video going over there. But I think perhaps the most meaningful thing, one of the most meaningful things, aside from having the wonderful opportunity to be more with my family, has been, as a musician, what do you do when your concerts have all been canceled? Why do you play? Why do you do what you do? And that question has been a really important one for me, not just to answer for myself, but also to be able to talk about that with my students, because so often, it seems that we go into music not always with the reason, because we love it. We begin that way, and then we suddenly become afraid, we have doubts, we have questions about what we can and cannot do. And I think dealing with that question has been very meaningful and important.
I appreciate that so much. And those are all strands that we're going to have to take up on another time. But I think Dan's right. The second half of your program starts with the fact that I'm a huge Bartók fan, and he hasn't been played much lately. And so will you guys take our last few minutes? We'll just take a few minutes and talk about the second half of the program.
Yeah, we're going to start the second half with Bartók's second sonata, which is a piece I've loved for years and years. I think it's really a masterwork of his, among many, of course, and also just the way it's kind of a pastiche, it's in the La Souffrise kind of Hungarian idea of two movements, the first one slow, the second one faster, in the same way that the Csárdas is, and basically any kind of Hungarian tune. But he takes all these little, even fragments of tunes, and makes them into sort of a quilt of such interesting changes to me. And the piece just makes so much sense somehow to me, and it always has. And I'm not sure exactly why, because someone hearing it for the first time might be like, oh my gosh, what is this? Oh, it just went there, went here. But somehow to me it makes a lot of sense. A little bit a la Bartók. When I was younger, I think the first time I went to Hungary, I would have been maybe 11 or 12 to play with the Hungarian National or the Franz Liszt Chamber Orchestra, and got really fascinated with all the music coming out of all the restaurants and all the windows. And continued that fascination, and actually, upon graduation from a school in Philadelphia, I actually moved to the Soviet Union then, to Moscow, and to learn ostensibly in the conservatory, but instead I ended up just traveling the whole time and learning about life and a lot of music. And so at that time kind of began my collection, that's why I said a la Bartók, of tunes. I went out to the former Yugoslavia, to Hungary again, to Kazakhstan, to Armenia, to Georgia, and just kind of listened, and even had people just sing for me till I memorized it. Even things like that. So at this point, I have a collection of tens of thousands of tunes, all of which I know quite well, because I'm a little obsessive. And a couple of years ago, Matt and I created a project, and I wanted to bring some of these tunes that have very rarely been heard, with some exceptions, to the concert stage for violin and piano. And so I did some arrangements myself, Matt did some, and tonight we will be doing 3 of them from this project. The project actually it's called Shiksa, which possibly in the Midwest you may not know the meaning of that word, but it is actually a Yiddish word for a non-Jewish girl. So I am the eponymous Shiksa of this project, because a lot of the music we did was of Jewish origin, Sephardic and Ashkenazic. But so we are going to start with Čoček right after the Bartók. Čoček is a Macedonian circle dance by Milica Paranosic, who is a Serbian composer living in New York. Then Sarisi Runyar from Armenia was the first song I ever heard when I got to Armenia after the long drive from Moscow. It's arranged by Seruj Krajan. And finally, the rather famous one, the Czardashian Rhapsody. It's a friend of ours is a very witty and terrific composer, Martin Kennedy, and he put the Csárdas, which is the most famous Hungarian tune for violin, together with the Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2 for piano, because they have the same chord structure. So anyway, it's a real barnstormer, and we'll be ending with that.
Just curious, I'm sure you must know the 1940 live recording of Bartók playing the Second Sonata.
The second, yeah, and the Kreutzer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's astonishing to, it's been a long time since I've done this, but to follow the score of the Second Sonata and hear just how differently they play it than what you see on the written page. And it almost seems to me that Bartók's improvisatory approach to his own music kind of ties this whole half together in a way.
Exactly. Yeah, it's very folky. I mean, all of these tunes are. He used to go around a little bit like I did, but you know, with his little magnetophone, and just have people sing into his mic. And those are. I mean, if it weren't for him, those would have been lost because you know, Hungary. I mean, there were wars and stuff, so a lot of people ended up not singing anymore. And so thank goodness that he did that. And there's a huge collection of Hungarian tunes thanks to him and Kodai. So, yeah.
Well, Laura, I've discovered that the next time we're together to visit, we're going to talk about Russia, because I've been there quite a few times.
Oh, wow.
And I speak enough just to be dangerous, but I love Russia. I love the Russian people, and I love their food. And
Actually, speaking of Russia, my name is Russian, and it's actually Lara.
Yes. We've been practicing all week. Well, we're actually past time, and we know that you all need a few moments to get ready for the concert, and we know that you watching will just want to take a minute and get something to drink and be ready to enjoy this beautiful evening of music. This is actually the last concert in the 71st season of the Wheaton College Artist Series, which was begun in 1950 with a performance by the Robert Shaw Chorale. And over the years, it's been an extraordinary array of great artists. One of my favorite was the night that Leontine Price sang from this stage.
Yes.
That was one of my she was 67 at the time, and it was just a fountain of grace. But those are stories for another time. I thank you all for joining us. And Matt and Lara, the next time you come to campus, we hope to be able to give you the hospitality that we normally intend for our guests. All I feel like is you've been subjected to rules and accommodations, and I know you understand that we're trying to keep our student body safe. But I just want you to know that the hospitality means a lot to us, and so the next visit we'll have meals together and have more up-close dialogue with students and with the rest of our faculty, because we have a wonderful, wonderful faculty. Thank you so much for taking this time. I want you to get back to whatever you need to do, and then Dr. Dean Michael Wilder will begin the program with a video introduction of our concert. It's 3.5, 4 minutes long. And then he'll say, now please welcome Lara St. John and Matt Herskowitz, and you be ready to come out and just make music in this place.
Thank you.
And everyone will be cheering from places near and far. Remember the email address, artistseries@wheaton.edu, so that if you are listening from somewhere, whether it's Libertyville or South Holland or Sao Paulo, please drop us a note and let us know how you enjoyed the concert, and we hope you'll come back. Thank you all.
Thanks so much.
We applaud at this point.
We'll bow.